Hello, I welcome you all to a discussion on the topic cognitive science and religion. Here in this discussion we shall try to critically analyze the attempt that cognitive science makes to explain religion and the development of religion. As we discuss this issue, we shall argue for basic points in relation to cognition and cognitive sciences and religion. Firstly, cognitive sciences reference of religion is too narrow. Secondly, some claims that are made within this narrow concept are also questionable. Thirdly, it is not just the brain and mind that generates social movements, but persons and human groups. Fourthly, the studying of the role of cognition in religion and its development started earlier than the cognitive turn of 1956. Further, please understand that cognitive science here in this discussion should be referred to as an evolutionary neurobiological cognitive science. We shall do so in order to make it understandable as to what cognitive science refers to as religion and what others refer to it as. So, starting with these introductory lines, let us now briefly understand the concepts of cognition and cognitive sciences. Now, let me talk about cognition. What is cognition? Cognition is the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experiences and the senses. This includes attention, memory and working memory, judgment and evaluation, reasoning and computation, problem solving and decision making, comprehension and production of language, etc. Well, we could simply put it as when we talk about cognition in psychology and artificial intelligence, it refers to the functioning of the mind, its abilities and mental processes and states of intelligent entities. Now, let me tell you that the concept of cognition is a really complex and complicated one. It is related to problem solving, analyzing, reflecting and reasoning. However, we must keep in mind that cognition and emotions are not exclusive of each other. Haidt argues that emotions can also be a form of cognition. Cognition can be of the following four types. Number 1, general cognition. Number 2, social cognition. Number 3, moral cognition. And number 4, epistemic cognition. As we know now what cognition is, let us now try and understand cognitive science. Well, then what is cognitive science? Cognitive science is the science of cognition. It is said to represent the scientific interdisciplinary study of the mind. There are many disciplines that fall under cognitive science. The disciplines that fall under cognitive science are artificial intelligence, linguistics, neuroscience, robotics, philosophy and psychology. However, we should remember that cognitive science does not refer to the sum of the result of the research of the above disciplines, but to their interaction on problem solving or even consciousness. So, how does cognitive science work? The scientists of cognitive science compare the human mind to that of a computer as an information processor. The areas of research are attention, imagery and problem solving or pattern recognition. Let us now come to the area of religion and its relation to cognitive science. Well, the task of defining religion is a really important one. All works on religion does have a chapter or two in the beginning of its work on the issue of defining religion. However, the task of defining religion is not an easy one. It is but a tedious and complex task. Different scholars and academicians have a different view on religion. the definition of religion is various and different, as they say, to each his own, and the same can be applied for the defining of religion. Different definitions are formed depending on the definer's position and disciplinary background. As Sharp has said, the task of defining religion is like that of a blind man's view on an elephant. One touches the ears and tells it to be a fan, and the other his trunk and calls him a branch of a tree. Likewise, there are many definitions of religion, but an agreement on one certain definition has not been made upon. When we compare these various definitions, we see that in cognitive science a narrow concept of religion is taken that weakens some of the claims made by it. Now let us look at some functional definitions of religions that stand out. We shall first study Ninian Smart's 7 dimensions of religion. Ninian Smart shows 7 dimensions of religion. These 7 dimensions of religion as put forward by Smart are: number 1, the practical dimension, the experiential dimension, the narrative dimension, doctrinal dimension, the ethical dimension, the social dimension, the material dimension. The first dimension is the practical dimension. This practical dimension includes the traditional practices, customs and rituals. The second dimension is the experiential dimension that consists of the experience one has of religion and God. The third dimension is the narrative dimension. The narrative includes the old stories and myths of religion. The fourth dimension, being the doctrinal, consists of doctrines and teachings and religious sayings. The fifth one is the ethical dimension. The moral and formal laws come under the ethical part. Under the sixth dimension, that is the social one, the institutional organization of the religion like church comes. And lastly, the seventh dimension, called the material dimension, includes all materialistic things like art, buildings and things used while performing rituals. Now let us discuss about Charles Grock's 5 dimensions. Grock's definition of religion posited 5 dimensions. These 5 dimensions are as follows. Number 1, the first one, that is the ideological, and this dimension is the belief. The second one is the ritualistic. This consists of all the ritual and practice of the religion. The third one is the intellectual dimension, which is knowledge of the religion. The fourth dimension, as given by Grock, is the experiential dimension that consists of the feeling and experience of the religion. Lastly, the consequential dimension focuses on the impacts and effects of being religious. Well, we can see that Grock's dimension does not bring about unquestioned results. These 5 dimensions are evident if the person that is being studied comes from a religiously homogeneous, sophisticated group. If a comparison is made between both Grock's and Smart's dimension, we can make out that all the dimensions correspond to each other. Let us now move to the various perspectives of cognitive science. Pascal Boyer, a French anthropologist, claims that there are 3 very important concepts of religion. Accordingly, they are supernaturalism, social exchange and moral values. So, how does this approach score within this dimensional grid? We could say that some dimensions like the emotional dimension and the experiential dimension does not get its full due. A detailed critical view of cognitive science approach to religion is given by Elizabeth Ozarak. She makes a note of some missed points. She is of the view that the psychological research is yet to give high importance to understand the ways in which religious cognition shapes human action. Another scholar, Kerry Buckley, is critical of cognitive science of religion as he believes that it pays less attention to phenomena that have religious values. These phenomena could be praying, meditating and healing. Justin Barrett opposes theism based on an analysis of neurotheology, evolutionary group selection theory and cognitive science of religion. He lays down 5 arguments. The arguments he provides are that theism is only a product of its neutral substrate. Theism a byproduct as a result of evolution. Theism does not involve truth but just utility. Theism basically beliefs that have been inherited as time passes. Theism is produced or accepted by minds that are prone to error. Well, we do agree with all the arguments and views placed forward by Ojarak, Buckley and Barrett. However, we could also add to this that cognitive science has a tendency, as Smith has pointed out, to collapse faith and religion. Faith and religion is not always the same thing. Faith does not mean just believing in the supernatural. So, now let us learn what cognitive science misses within its range. So, according to Bayer, some people deny having any religious beliefs. He is of the view that they do not have religious beliefs because they are assured of a supernatural being or have the evidence to their existence. They are sure of the fact that there is a super powerful agent out there. These people tend to grow and evolve to find an idea of a culturally accurate description of such supernatural agent. He wonders how such a thing happens. However, his view fails to take into account the various issues of human creativity, curiosity of human beings, the issues of self-reliance. Now, we shall talk about a study based in Switzerland. This study is an empirical longitudinal research done in Switzerland. The total time of study was a span of 10 years, where the same sets of questions were used on the same respondent at different time for exactly 3 times intervals over 10 years. These questions were basically based on origin, evolution, universe and the role of God in it. After this study, it was understood there are 4 developmental stages using the grounded theory. The respondent here is a girl named Nina. In her first interview, she is aged 5 years and 5 months. In her first interview, Nina, on being questioned what God is, said that God has made the nature and the buildings except a few. The buildings that God made were high buildings because humans didn't have a high ladder to construct such tall buildings. It wasn't possible for humans to construct such buildings of great height. She also said that God made houses, then tables, the water and plants and then people. Nina, aged 5, seemed to project her personal experiences onto everything and gives God the image of an artisan who creates things. So, during that phase, God, according to her, was a creator and an artisan who created and built everything. The second interview was made to Nina when she was 9 years 2 months old. When Nina was 9 years 2 months, she was again interviewed with the same set of questions. Well, during this time, her views partly changed and some remained intact. She said God created the nature and the climate. However, she had a contradiction to her earlier statement. This time, she said that all things that were needed for use was made by humans. Humans created things that they thought they needed it. Nina was again interviewed when she was 15. This time when Nina turned 15, she showed a lot of changes in her view and no longer did follow a traditional Christian view. Now she felt that God certainly did not create the world. She said the world has been created on its own, but maybe God has helped walking behind the scene. She said she didn't know what God is, but what God is not. So at the end of the study we could say that children have a mind that is independent and creative. They imagine things and have their own thoughts, creating own religious views. She constructs her own religious world where her view of God keeps on changing with time. As an offend, she has a different perspective to it. As human being grows, we realize that some things need to change our views and thoughts, and we become critical about them. Our views and perspectives change with time, and eventually we start framing our own thoughts accordingly. Now let us discuss the issue of human development. Well, what exactly determines the development of a newborn baby is not only the genes and neurons, but the relationship she shares with the one taking care of her. According to Sabatini, the behavior of a human is affected by the genetic expression and also interacts with it. The brain does the part of translating social relations into biological signals that affect and influence the working of the body and parts of the brain. Bernard Spilka is of the view that religion and genetics have no connection. However, indirect functions could be present looking at the various roles religion plays in our life. What is of importance is the equilibrium between individual and the society. Earlier individuals, in order to survive, had to just fall in line. Now the strategy is to give more emphasis to individuals' freedom, rights and entitlements. Multiculturalism and globalization make it difficult to attain such equilibrium. Well, Rick says on the basis of the above analysis, a theory of ontogenetic religious development needs to consist of the following characteristics. These characteristics are: firstly, a detailed explanation of relevant psychical processes that could be emotional, intellectual and volitional that takes place within organisms. Secondly, the analysis of development as the gradual coordination of individual thought and biophysical, socio-cultural and perceived spiritual reality. Thirdly, outlining social contexts in which development takes place and the ways in which these contexts relate to religious development of the individual. Fourthly, accounting for the universal characteristics of religious development as well as for individual differences. And lastly, making clear the processes affecting the change in development and the working of the factors that work for or against religious development. If we understand religion and development better, we could probably bring an improved peaceful living together. But unfortunately, any such theory that has all the above characteristics has not been framed till date. In 2005, George Scarlett has presented religious and spiritual development as a very complex and a controversial issue. What he does is that he criticizes Piaget's work of stage structural accounts. He further realizes the need of combining the strength of stage structural approaches with the strengths of current approaches. However, despite many criticisms, 2 points of Piaget's work are valid. Firstly, psychic structures do exist and that lead to a certain developmental logic. Secondly, individuals are not conscious of their ongoing intellectual development and its mechanisms. Therefore, this cannot be made comprehensible by questionnaires, but from task performance or problem solving. The above mentioned points in Piaget's work are very much valid. Now, let us briefly discuss the stage of structural theories of religious and faith development. We shall discuss 2 theories here. The first one will be the faith development theory of James Fowler of 1981, and the second one is Theory of Religious Judgment of Fritz Ozer and Paul Munder of 1991. These two theories extensively discuss categorical and individual strength and weaknesses of stage structural theories of religion and faith development theories. We shall see that in both theories cognitive development is incorporated, but in different ways. Let us now discuss the faith development theory of James Fowler of 1981. Fowler has named his pre-stage and sixth stage of faith as following. There is one pre-stage named undifferentiated primal path. Then he names the sixth stage as number 1 intuitive projective faith, number 2 mythic literal faith, number 3 synthetic conventional faith, number 4 individuative reflective faith, number 5 conjunctive faith, number 6 universalizing faith. He adds 7 dimensions to all these stages. These dimensions are form of logic, perspective taking, form of moral judgment, bounds of social awareness, locus of authority, form of words coherence and symbolic function, to which stages of self were added later. Well, there is one thing in his theory, the development of epistemic cognition is implicit. Now, let us discuss briefly the stages in the theory of Ozer and Munder of 1991. This theory is related to the process of evolution of a person, the relationship of God as understood from experience of the reality, relating to God mostly during crisis. His stages are labeled as Deus ex machina, Do ut des, deism, divine plan and universal solidarity. Now, let us discuss epistemic cognition. Well, some scholars are of the view that cognitive scientists do not give much attention to epistemic cognition. There are many things these scholars tend to overlook. The first one is ontological development. Children are unclear about some questions like the existence of fairies and mermaids. Well, it may take years for a child to understand the answers to these questions. Ontological development is concerned with the existence or non-existence of various entities and their predicates. The level of ontological development is co-determined by the stage of reflecting on epistemic issues and the degree of mastering various thought forms. The second is stages of reflecting on epistemic issues. So, if we look back at the interview with Nina, it shows a developing reflection on epistemic issues. In the stage 0, Nina has no idea about the epistemic issues, so she does not critically talk about them. In the stage 1, it is mostly about object reflection. They become prisoners of their own ideas and representation in this stage. They start believing in fairies, Santa and dwarfs. That is a part of the children world, not the real one. In stage 2, the reflection turns to one's means of knowing specific facts. Here, one tends to shift from their idea of God and actually figure out what God is or isn't. The result might be negative theology, as they realize God did not build houses or chairs. When one reaches stage 3, the understanding of general epistemic issues begins. Hence, they start pondering if one is a realist or a constructivist. The third one is matching thought form and problem structure. A thought form is a specific structure of the elements of thinking whose relational organization ensures the functioning of the whole. It is required to solve the tasks like crossword puzzle, negations in relation to wages between unions and employers, explaining right in detail, filling a well-defined post. Well, with this we come to the end of our lecture, As we have learned, cognitive science is very important in order to understand religion and spirituality and the development during life. But along with this, we also need to look into other aspects for a complete and better understanding. We have also understood that simple approaches might help us in a better understanding, but when taken alone cannot elucidate religious and spiritual development. So, with this I end my discussion on cognitive science and religion. Thank you.